They thought it would be funny. A famous pianist smirked and told a simple woman's son to play the piano, right there in front of everyone. It was meant to embarrass him. Whispers spread. Smiles curled. Phones waited for the failure. But the moment his fingers touched the keys, the room changed. Laughter died. Confidence cracked. Because what happened next didn't just shock the audience. It exposed how wrong they all were. They came dressed for certainty. Certainty that they would be impressed. Certainty that nothing unexpected would happen tonight. The hall was full before the first note was played. Not the kind of crowd that came to discover something new. This was the kind that came to confirm what they already believed. That greatness looked a certain way. That talent arrived announced. That people like him were born for stages like this. The pianist knew it too. He stood near the piano, smiling easily, accepting praise before earning it. He had learned long ago how to let silence work for him. How to let people lean forward just by waiting. Every movement was calm, practiced, superior. Tonight was routine, until he noticed the boy. The boy stood beside his mother near the side aisle. Not seated, not invited, just there. Too close to the piano, too close to the stage. The woman kept her hands folded tight, whispering reminders to stay still. Her clothes were simple, clean but worn. The boy's shoes were scuffed. His fingers moved slightly, as if counting something only he could hear. The pianist watched them longer than necessary. Something about it annoyed him. This was not a place for lingering. This was not a place for curiosity without permission. He had spent decades earning the right to sit at that piano, and now a child stood there staring at it as if it belonged to him. He leaned toward one of the organizers and murmured something. A quick glance followed. A shrug. No action. The pianist sighed softly, then smiled. He took his seat. The room hushed instantly. The first piece was flawless. It always was. Fingers moving fast enough to silence doubt. Notes landing exactly where they were supposed to. Applause rose on cue. He stood, bowed, accepted it like a man collecting something owed. Then he sat again. Before playing the next piece, his eyes drifted intentionally toward the side aisle. "Before we continue," he said, voice light, almost playful, "I noticed something interesting." A ripple of attention followed his gaze. The woman stiffened. The boy froze. "There's a young man over there," the pianist continued, smiling wider now, "who seems very interested in the piano." A few quiet chuckles. "He's been watching my hands the entire time," the pianist added. "Haven't you?" All eyes turned. The boy nodded once. "Small, honest." The woman whispered urgently, shaking her head. The pianist tilted his head. "Do you play?" The question hovered, heavy, public. The boy glanced at his mother. She didn't answer, couldn't. Her face was already red, already apologetic. "A little," the boy said. That was enough. The pianist laughed softly into the microphone. "Not cruel. Not yet." "A little," he repeated. "Well, that's wonderful." More laughter followed. Comfortable, safe laughter. "You know," the pianist went on, "people always say music belongs to everyone." He paused. "So why don't you come up here and show us?" The room reacted instantly. Some leaned forward. Some looked away. A few smiled with interest sharpened by expectation. The woman shook her head now, clearly, frantically. The boy didn't move. "Oh, don't worry," the pianist said smoothly. "This is just for fun. A small joke. Nothing serious. A joke." That word did the damage. Refusing now would make the boy look afraid. Agreeing would make him the entertainment. The pianist knew it. The crowd felt it. The silence stretched just long enough to trap them all inside it. The woman finally spoke, voice barely audible. "He's never played on a stage." The pianist nodded sympathetically. "Neither had I once." That earned laughter. He stood and gestured toward the piano. "Come on, just a few notes. Let's see what a little sounds like." The boy looked up at the piano. Not with fear, with recognition. That was the first thing no one noticed. The woman's hand trembled as she let go of his sleeve. She whispered something to him. He nodded once more and stepped forward. Each step sounded too loud. The crowd watched with the patience of people waiting for a predictable ending. The pianist stepped aside, arms crossed loosely, already satisfied. This would remind everyone where the line was drawn, who belonged where. The boy reached the bench. He hesitated, just for a moment, not because he was scared, because he was listening. The room breathed together. The pianist leaned back slightly, lips curved in anticipation. "Whenever you're ready," he said. The boy placed his hands on the keys, and the joke was about to end, even if no one knew it yet. The boy didn't play right away. That irritated the pianist. Silence, when controlled, belonged to him. Silence was part of the performance. But now it stretched without permission, pulled thin by uncertainty. Someone coughed. Someone shifted. A few smiles tightened, ready to turn awkward. The pianist cleared his throat. "Take your time," he said generously. "We're all waiting." The boy inhaled slowly. His fingers hovered, not trembling, not stiff, just hovering, as if he were checking the distance between two familiar thoughts. The woman clasped her hands together so tightly her knuckles went pale. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at the pianist. She watched her son's shoulders. She knew that posture. She had seen it late at night, in their small apartment, when he thought she was asleep. The first note came softly. Not wrong. Not unsure. Soft on purpose. A few people frowned. This wasn't the sound of a child poking keys. It wasn't loud enough to mock. It wasn't clumsy enough to laugh at. The pianist's smile didn't fade yet. He assumed luck. Then the second note came. And the third. Not a scale. Not random. A phrase. The room shifted. Someone in the third row leaned forward without realizing it. Someone else stopped smiling. The pianist uncrossed his arms. The boy's hands began to move. Not fast. Not slow. Certain. Measured. Like someone speaking a language they didn't need to translate. The woman's breath caught. She covered her mouth, eyes filling before she understood why. She had heard him play before, of course, but never like this. Never here. Never with this stillness around him. The pianist straightened. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't muscle memory from copying videos. The boy wasn't guessing. He wasn't searching for the next note. He knew where he was going. A whisper passed through the audience. Not words. Just sound. The sound people make when they sense they may have misjudged something. The boy leaned slightly into the keys now. His foot found the pedal without looking. The sound deepened, grew wider, filled space that moments ago had belonged entirely to someone else. The pianist's jaw tightened. He stepped closer. Just one step, then stopped himself. Watched. This was wrong. Not impossible, wrong. Talent like this did not appear uninvited. It did not wear scuffed shoes. It did not arrive holding its mother's hand. The boy's expression didn't change. No smile. No panic. Just focus. Not even the kind that strains. The kind that settles. The piece unfolded. People stopped shifting. Phones that had been raised earlier were now forgotten, held still. A woman in the back wiped her eyes and didn't know when she had started crying. The pianist felt something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Doubt. Not about the boy. About himself. He had expected noise. He had expected exposure. He had expected to reclaim control within seconds. Instead, the piano sounded different. Not cleaner. Not faster. Honest. The boy reached a passage that required confidence. Not speed, confidence. A place where hesitation ruined everything. He didn't hesitate. The sound swelled. The hall followed it. People forgot where they were. Forgot why this had started. Forgot the joke entirely. The woman sank into a chair near the aisle, knees weak. She whispered her son's name, though he couldn't hear her. She thought of all the times she had told him to keep it down, to stop playing so late, to be realistic. She had thought she was protecting him. The pianist felt heat rise in his face. Not anger, something worse. Exposure. Every note the boy played stripped something away. Not skill. Status. The invisible wall that separated performer from audience. Teacher from student. Master from joke. The boy was not performing at them. He was playing through them. When the final note faded, it didn't disappear. It stayed. The silence afterward was heavier than applause. No one moved. No one breathed. It was the kind of silence that made people afraid to break it first. The pianist looked out at the audience, then at the boy. He waited for the claps. They didn't come immediately. That terrified him. Then one person stood, then another. Then the sound hit all at once. Not polite, not measured, loud, uncontrolled, real. The boy's hands slipped from the keys. He looked up, startled, as if waking from something private. His eyes searched the room until they found his mother. She was crying openly now. The pianist stepped forward, clapping last. Too late. He leaned toward the microphone, but the applause drowned him out. He lowered his hands slowly, watched the boy stand, watched the crowd watch him. The balance had shifted. The pianist felt it settle in his chest, heavy and undeniable. This was no longer his stage, and he didn't yet know how badly that was going to cost him. The applause faded unevenly, not because it ended, but because people didn't know how to stop it without admitting something had changed. The boy stood beside the bench, unsure what to do next. He hadn't planned for this part. There was no ending rehearsed for applause. At home, the last note usually dissolved into silence, into thin walls and neighbors and his mother softly saying his name. Here, the silence felt different. The pianist cleared his throat again. This time, it didn't carry authority. It sounded thin, almost fragile. "Well," he said, forcing a smile. "That was unexpected." A few people laughed. Not with him, at the situation, at themselves. The pianist gestured toward the bench. "You've clearly had some lessons." The boy shook his head. "No, sir." That landed harder than the performance. "No lessons?" the pianist repeated. "No," the boy said again, calm, certain. The woman stood up before she realized she was moving. "His grandfather," she said, voice shaking but steady enough to carry. "He taught him when he was little, before he passed." The pianist nodded slowly, as if filing away an explanation that didn't quite fit. "I see." He didn't. He turned back to the audience. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes raw talent appears in the most surprising places." It sounded like a conclusion, like a neat way to wrap this up and move on. But the room didn't release. Someone in the front row spoke. "What was that piece?" The boy hesitated, looked at his mother. She nodded. "It's something my grandfather used to play," he said. "He never told me the name." The pianist's fingers twitched. That piece wasn't simple. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't something picked up by ear alone. Carried structure, discipline, years. The pianist felt eyes shifting toward him now. Not admiring, measuring. He forced another smile. "Well," he said lightly, "you must have listened very closely." The boy nodded. "Every day." A murmur rolled through the hall. The pianist felt his control slipping further. He had invited this. He had framed it as a joke. Now he was trapped inside it. He stepped closer to the boy, lowered his voice. "Do you know how rare it is to play like that?" The boy looked up at him, not intimidated, not impressed. "I just play how it sounds in my head," he said. "That did it." The pianist straightened abruptly. The words struck something raw. He had spent his life learning how to silence the sound in his head, how to replace it with precision, with approval, with control. He turned away, pacing once, then back again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said louder now, "this is all very charming, but we do have a program to continue." A few people shifted. Someone coughed. No one applauded this time. The woman stepped forward, not onto the stage, just closer. "He didn't mean to interrupt," she said. "You asked him to play." The pianist met her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't angry. That unsettled him more than anger would have. "Yes," he said stiffly. "I did." A pause. "And," someone whispered, too loud. The pianist swallowed. He had a choice. He could dismiss this, smile, resume, pretend this was a novelty, a momentary curiosity. The audience would allow it. They always had. But the boy still stood there, waiting, not for permission, for honesty. The pianist felt something tighten in his chest. Pride, fear, something breaking loose. He looked at the piano, at the bench, at the boy's hands, still slightly curved, as if ready. "Do you know how to read music?" he asked. The boy nodded. "Yes, sir." Another murmur. "Where?" the pianist asked. "Library," the boy said. "And books people throw away." The woman flinched. She hadn't known that part. The pianist looked away. He had spent a fortune on tutors, on schools, on credentials, on being told he was exceptional. And here stood a child who had learned in silence, in leftovers, in shadows. The pianist felt the room waiting again. Not for music, for his response. He took a breath, slower than before. "You understand," he said carefully, "that playing here is not the same as playing at home." The boy nodded. "Yes. And you're not nervous?" The boy considered this. "I was," he said. "Before." "Before what?" "Before you made it a joke." The words were simple. They cut anyway. The pianist felt heat rise again, but this time it wasn't anger. It was something closer to shame. The audience didn't laugh. No one moved. The pianist looked out at the faces watching him. Not hostile, curious, expectant. He realized, with a quiet panic, that they were no longer judging the boy. They were judging him, and whatever he chose next would not be forgotten. The pianist felt the room closing in on him. Not physically, socially. The kind of pressure that didn't push from one side, but from every direction at once. He had lived on stages his entire adult life, but this was different. There was no music to hide behind now. No practiced sequence. No applause waiting on cue. He cleared his throat again. No one filled the silence for him this time. "You're very confident," he said to the boy. The boy shook his head. "I'm just not scared anymore." A few people inhaled sharply. The pianist glanced at the woman. She stood straight, hands clasped, eyes steady, not pleading, not defiant, present, as if she had decided that whatever happened next, she would witness it fully. He turned back to the piano. He could end this, thank the boy, escort him off the stage, resume the program. The audience would applaud politely. They would talk about the moment later, the novelty, the surprise. Then they would forget. But the piano sat there between them, waiting. "You understand," the pianist said slowly, "that this instrument is not forgiving." The boy nodded. "I know, and that people here expect excellence." Another nod. The pianist exhaled through his nose. He realized something then that unsettled him deeply. The boy wasn't trying to prove anything. That was what scared him. "Very well," the pianist said. "One more piece." The audience stirred. Not excitement, shock. "One more," he repeated. "And then we continue as planned." He stepped aside. Not dramatically, not graciously, simply moved. The boy looked at his mother. She didn't nod this time. She didn't shake her head either. She trusted him. He sat. The bench creaked softly. This time there was no hesitation at all. The first note landed with weight. Not loud, certain. The pianist felt his stomach drop. He recognized this opening. He had played it himself, countless times, in competitions, in examinations, in halls where mistakes were remembered. The boy's hands moved with intention, not speed, intention. He shaped the silence between notes as carefully as the notes themselves. The room leaned forward again. A man in the back whispered, "That's not possible," and didn't realize he'd spoken. The pianist watched closely now, too closely, searching for flaws, waiting for the crack that would restore order. It didn't come. The boy navigated the difficult passages without strain. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His breathing stayed even. He wasn't fighting the music. He was letting it speak. The woman pressed a hand to her chest. She remembered the nights he'd fallen asleep at the table, head resting near sheet music she couldn't read. She had thought it was a phase, comfort, something to pass the time. She had been wrong. The pianist felt something old stir. Not envy, recognition, the memory of when music had once felt like this to him. Before critics, before reputations, before fear of failure. The boy reached the center of the piece. This was where most performers showed themselves, where interpretation mattered more than technique, where ego crept in. The boy didn't push. He listened, and the piano responded. The sound filled the hall, warm and unguarded. People forgot to blink, forgot to shift, forgot themselves. The pianist lowered his head. He knew now, fully, undeniably, this was not a trick. This was not luck. This was not something he could frame as amusing or accidental. This was real. When the final note faded, no one rushed to clap. They waited. The boy let his hands rest on the keys for a moment longer. Then he lifted them and stood. The applause came like a wave breaking free, louder than before, less controlled. Some people stood immediately. Others followed without thinking. The pianist did not clap. He stared at the piano. Then, slowly, he turned to the boy. "You should not be standing there," he said quietly. Not into the microphone, just to him. The room hushed again. "You should be studying," the pianist continued. "You should be supported, guided." The boy shrugged. "I just play." The pianist closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his voice was different. "What is your name?" The boy told him. The pianist nodded once. Then he turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight did not go as planned." A soft ripple of laughter. But some moments are not meant to be planned. He gestured to the boy. This, he said, is one of them. He paused. And it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. The woman's breath caught. The pianist straightened his jacket. And in that moment, everyone understood something was about to change. Not for the boy, but for him. The pianist stood still as the applause continued around him. He had played thousands of concerts, received awards, watched audiences rise to their feet because they were supposed to. But this applause was different. It wasn't aimed at the stage. It wasn't even aimed at the boy alone. It was aimed at the moment, at the crack in something long believed unbreakable. He waited for the sound to settle before speaking again. I have spent most of my life believing that music is earned, he said, through discipline, through access, through training. He glanced at the boy. Tonight, I was reminded that sometimes music simply survives. The room went quiet, not tense, listening. The boy stood beside his mother now. He hadn't moved closer to the spotlight. He hadn't stepped back either. He just stood where he was placed by circumstance, not ambition. The pianist stepped toward them. You didn't embarrass yourself, he said to the boy. And you didn't embarrass me. That was not true. But it was the closest he could come to saying what mattered. You revealed something, he continued, to all of us. He turned to the woman. I made a mistake, he said plainly. No flourish, no defense. She nodded once. That was enough. The audience began to murmur again, softer this time. Not gossip, processing. People looked at each other differently now, as if reassessing invisible lines they had never questioned before. The pianist took a breath. There will be no more program tonight, he said. A few gasps, a few surprised laughs. Not because we cannot continue, he added, but because it would be dishonest to pretend this was just an interruption. He looked at the piano, then back at the boy. I would like to help you, he said, if you allow it. The boy didn't answer right away. He looked at his mother. She hesitated, just a second, then nodded. Okay, the boy said. The pianist smiled, not the polished smile from before. Something smaller, unsteady. The audience applauded again, briefly, then stopped, as if sensing the moment didn't need noise anymore. People began to stand, not all at once. Slowly, conversations started in low voices. Some wiped their eyes. Some stared at the stage as if trying to fix it in memory before it slipped away. The woman placed a hand on her son's shoulder. She whispered something to him. He nodded. As they turned to leave, the pianist spoke again. Wait. They stopped. He reached into his jacket and removed a card, wrote something on it, walked it over himself. This is my number, he said to the woman. Not an assistant's. Mine. She took it carefully. I don't make promises lightly, he added, but I don't forget moments like this. Neither did anyone else. They walked out together, not escorted, not celebrated, just leaving. The doors closed behind them. The hall felt empty in a way it never had before. The pianist returned to the piano alone. He sat, placed his hands on the keys, then stopped. For the first time in years, he didn't play. He realized something then. Sitting in the quiet he had once commanded so easily. The boy hadn't taken anything from him. He had given something back. Weeks later, people would talk about that night. They would argue about whether talent was born or built, about fairness, about opportunity, about arrogance. But what stayed with them wasn't the debate. It was the look on the pianist's face when the joke ended, and the look on the boy's face when he realized the world had been listening all along. Some moments don't end careers. They end illusions, and sometimes that's the most shocking thing of all.